I was in the middle of a deposition when my phone buzzed for the fourth time in 10 minutes. I silenced it. When you work as a forensic accountant for a litigation firm, you learn quickly that the world does not stop spinning just because you are cross-referencing wire transfers from 2019. My supervisor had a rule: phones down during client work. I respected that rule. I had always respected rules like that. The fifth buzz came 30 seconds later. I stepped out into the hallway and looked at my screen. 3 missed calls from my sister, 1 from my mother, and a text that read, "Call me. It's about the house." My stomach did something I didn't have words for at the time. I had bought my house 14 months earlier. A 3-bedroom Craftsman in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. Light gray siding, original hardwood floors, a backyard with an oak tree that had probably been there since before my parents were born. I paid $387,000 for it. I put down $80,000 that I had saved over 6 years of living in a studio apartment and eating lunch at my desk every single day. I was 31 years old, and it was the first thing I had ever owned that no one could take from me. Or so I believed. I called my sister back. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice had that particular flatness it gets when she's already decided how a conversation is going to go. "The house is gone," she said. I genuinely did not understand the words. What? It sold. Like, it closed. Last Tuesday, I stood in a hallway outside a conference room in downtown Columbus and I felt the floor tilt. Let me back up. 8 months before that phone call, my firm sent me to Seattle on a long-term engagement. A manufacturing company was being audited as part of a major acquisition and they needed someone on site for the full duration. My supervisor asked if I'd be willing to relocate temporarily. The timeline was 6 to 8 months. Maybe longer. I said yes. I had no reason to say no. I was single, I had no kids, and the work was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes engagement that I had been working toward for years. The house was the problem. I didn't want to rent it out to strangers. I had heard enough horror stories from colleagues to know that even good tenants can leave damage that takes years to undo. My mother offered a solution almost immediately. "Your sister can stay there," she said. "She's been looking for a place anyway. She'll take care of it, keep the heat on, water the plants, make sure nothing goes wrong." My sister was 28 at the time. She had recently broken up with the guy she'd been living with for 3 years and was technically between apartments. It made practical sense. She'd have a place to stay. I'd have someone keeping an eye on my property. Everyone wins. My mother made it sound so logical. She has a gift for that. I want to be clear about something. I trusted my sister. Not blindly, not without history. We had our friction, all sisters do. But in the way you trust someone who has been in your life your entire life. She was family. That meant something to me. It still does, in a complicated way I haven't fully worked out yet. Before I left, I drafted a simple property management agreement. Nothing aggressive, just something that documented the arrangement. She could live there rent-free in exchange for maintaining the property, paying the utilities out of a monthly stipend I'd transfer to her and keeping me informed of anything that came up. I asked her to sign it. She laughed. "You're really going to make me sign a contract," she said. "I'm your sister." My mother gave me a look that I have seen my entire life. The look that says, "You are being too much." I withdrew the paperwork. I don't know if I regret that or if it would have mattered. Probably both. I flew to Seattle in September. The engagement was everything I'd hoped. Demanding and interesting and the kind of work that makes you feel useful in a concrete way. I called home regularly. My sister texted me photos of the backyard, complained about a slow drain in the second bathroom, asked if I cared if she painted the guest room. I said yes to the photos. I told her to call a plumber and I'd reimburse her, and I said the guest room could stay as is. Everything seemed fine. In February, my sister stopped answering my calls. I wasn't immediately alarmed. She goes through phases. She had done this before, withdrawn for a few weeks, then resurfaced like nothing happened. I texted instead. She replied, but vaguely. "Everything's fine. Been busy. Talk soon." My mother, when I called her, said my sister was going through something personal. A rough patch. I shouldn't push. I didn't push. In April, I got a call from a neighbor I barely knew, the older man next door who had introduced himself when I moved in and occasionally waved from his driveway. He had found my number from a card I left with him the previous year. "I wanted to let you know," he said. "There are people I don't recognize going in and out of your house. Moving furniture last week. Looked like a lot of activity." I called my sister immediately. No answer. I called my mother. "Oh, she mentioned she might be redecorating," my mother said. "You know how she is." I did know how she was. That was exactly what worried me. I checked my bank account that night. The monthly stipend transfer I set up for utilities had gone through every month like clockwork. I had never looked closely at it because I had no reason to. That night, I looked closely. The amount leaving my account each month was mine. What I couldn't see was what was actually being paid with it, or whether the mortgage servicer was receiving what they were owed. I logged into my mortgage account. Current due $0, paid through April. That part was fine. I logged into the county auditor's website. I had bookmarked it when I first purchased the property, out of habit. The property record loaded. Owner of record, Linden Capital Properties, LLC. I sat very still for a long time. I want to describe what that moment feels like, because I don't think people who haven't experienced it can quite understand. It is not panic, exactly. It is something quieter and more disorienting than panic. It is the sensation of reaching for something that should be there. Something solid, something you built, something that is yours, and finding air. My name was not on the property record. My house had been transferred to an LLC I had never heard of, and the transfer date was February 28th. My sister had stopped answering my calls at the beginning of February. I am a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living. I reconstruct what happened after someone has tried very hard to make sure no one can find out what happened. I do this work because I am good at it, and because I believe that financial crimes are real crimes even when they look like paperwork. I tell you this not to brag, but because it is the single most relevant fact in everything that followed. I did not call my sister. I did not call my mother. I did not call anyone in my family. I called a real estate attorney in Columbus. Her name was a reference from a colleague, and I had her on the phone within 20 minutes. I explained what I had found. She pulled the deed records while I was on the phone. The deed showed a quitclaim transfer executed in late February. The notary signature on the document was real. The grantor signature, the one bearing my name, was not. Someone had forged my signature on a quitclaim deed and transferred my house to an LLC. The LLC, when we traced it, had been registered in Ohio in January, 2 months before the transfer. The registered agent was a man I did not recognize, but the mailing address on the LLC's registration paperwork was my house. And then, one layer further, the LLC had already sold the property to a third-party buyer, a real buyer with a mortgage who had closed in good faith and moved in 2 weeks prior. That buyer had nothing to do with any of this. I want to be clear about that. He was a victim of a different kind. My attorney sent a preservation letter to the county recorder's office that same day. She also put me in contact with a title insurance specialist because my original purchase had included an owner's title insurance policy, something I had paid for and largely forgotten about. That policy, as it turned out, would become important. Meanwhile, I started my own trace. The registered agent for Linden Capital Properties was a man my sister had been dating for 3 months. I found this out through a combination of public records and a mutual acquaintance who had no idea she was telling me anything significant. She mentioned his name in passing. I recognized it from the LLC documents immediately. He was 26 years old. He worked sporadically in real estate wholesaling, a field that exists in a legal gray area and attracts people who want to make large amounts of money very quickly without what I would describe as an abundance of ethical guardrails. He had a previous civil judgment against him in another county for a contract dispute. My sister had met him at a bar in November. By January, he had moved into my house. By February, he had registered an LLC using my address, and together, though the final determination of culpability was made by others, they had forged my signature on a quitclaim deed and sold my house. The sale price was $341,000. Below market, cash transaction. The kind of deal that moves fast and doesn't ask many questions. I don't know exactly what they planned to do with the money. By the time I was tracing it, a significant portion had already moved through 3 different accounts. Some of it had gone to paying off his previous judgment. Some of it appeared to be in an account I couldn't easily access from Seattle. Some of it, and this is the part that I think about sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, had been spent on things that leave no trace at all. I flew back to Columbus on a Thursday. I did not tell my family I was coming. My attorney had already been in contact with law enforcement. The county sheriff's office had a financial crimes unit, and a detective had been assigned to the case. Before I did anything else, I met with him. I brought everything I had compiled: the LLC registration documents, the deed, the title chain, the bank records I had been able to legally obtain, and my own analysis of how the transaction had been structured. He looked at my folder for a long time. "You put this together yourself?" he said. "I do this professionally," I said. He nodded slowly. "It's good work." That meant something to me, even in the middle of everything. The arrest happened 4 days after I returned. My sister's boyfriend was taken into custody on charges of forgery, deed fraud, and theft by deception. My sister was also questioned. Whether she would face charges was, at that point, still being determined. I was not there for the arrest. I was at my attorney's office going over the civil recovery process with the title insurance company's legal team. My original owner's title policy covered exactly this scenario: a fraudulent transfer executed without my knowledge or consent. The insurance company was subrogating against the parties responsible for the fraud, which meant pursuing them for damages so that I did not have to. The third-party buyer, the man who had purchased my house in good faith and moved his family in, did not have to leave. I want to explain this because it was the thing I cared about most after my own recovery. He had done nothing wrong. His purchase was made in good faith with no knowledge of the fraud. The legal resolution involved his title insurance policy as well, and the civil proceedings addressed his position separately. I will not pretend I understood every step of that process, but I understood the outcome. An innocent family was not turned out of their home because of something my sister and her boyfriend did. That mattered to me. My house was legally restored to my ownership through the court process. It took 4 months. I called my mother the night after the arrest. She knew. Of course she knew. She had known something was wrong for weeks, I think, and had chosen not to ask questions she didn't want answered. When I told her what had happened, the full shape of it, plainly and without softening, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You have to understand, she was in a bad place." I had prepared myself for that sentence. I had rehearsed my response a dozen times on the flight home from Seattle. I had a whole architecture of articulate, controlled things to say. I didn't say any of them. "She forged my signature," I said, "on a legal document, and sold my house. She's your sister. I know who she is." The conversation ended shortly after that. My mother called twice more in the following weeks. I answered once. The second time, I let it go to voicemail. The message was about family and forgiveness and how these things happen and how I needed to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. I thought about it. I thought about it seriously, the way I try to think seriously about hard things. I decided that the kind of person I wanted to be was one who did not pretend that what happened was something other than what it was. There is a question I've been asked several times since this became something people know about. Usually it comes from people who hear the story and focus on the legal outcome, the charges, the insurance resolution, the restored title, and they ask some version of, "Did it feel worth it?" I always have to think about what worth it means in that context. It cost me 4 months of my life. Legal fees that I eventually recovered, but not without effort. My relationship with my mother, which has never been the same and probably won't be. My relationship with my sister, which I'm still in the process of figuring out, now that charges have been resolved and she is doing what the court asked her to do and trying to put her life together. My house sold about a year later, actually. I made that choice myself, with no one's signature but my own. I had decided I wanted to live somewhere that didn't hold that particular weight. I bought a condo closer to downtown. I read every document at the closing table. My attorney was there. The whole thing took 2 hours and was perfectly unremarkable, which is exactly how a real estate transaction is supposed to feel. But here's what worth it actually means to me. I am a person who traces money for a living. I reconstruct the truth from paper trails and account statements and documents that someone hoped would disappear. I do this work because I believe that what happened deserves to be known, that there is value, something more than just legal or financial value, in the act of finding out what is true and making it visible. My sister and her boyfriend believed that distance and silence and a forged signature would be enough, that I was far away and busy, and maybe wouldn't notice until it was too late to matter. They didn't account for the specific person they had decided to steal from. I don't say that with pride, exactly. It's more complicated than pride. What I know is this: the oak tree in that backyard was over 60 years old. Some things take a long time to build. Some things, when they fall, leave an impression in the ground that doesn't go away just because the tree is gone. I think about that sometimes. I think about what I built in those 6 years of saved lunches in studio apartments and choosing carefully. I think about the night I stood in a hallway in Seattle with my phone in my hand and felt the floor tilt. And I think about the closing table, my attorney beside me, my own signature in my own hand on my own terms. That is what it felt like when the ground came back. I have thought about cause and effect a lot since all of this happened. Not in an abstract way. I think about it the way I think about the work I do, concretely tracing one thing back to another until the picture becomes clear. My sister made a series of choices. Each one followed the last with its own internal logic, the way financial fraud always does. It starts small, a rationalization, a convenience, a door left open. Then the next choice is easier because the first one already happened. By the time she was signing paperwork with my name on it, I think she had talked herself into a version of events where it made sense. Where I was far away and she was the one actually there, actually present, actually dealing with things. Where she deserved something for that. Where the house was almost as much hers as mine. That is how that kind of thinking works. It builds a whole architecture out of nothing, and the person inside it can't see the walls anymore. Her boyfriend understood exactly what he was doing. I want to be clear about that. He had done versions of it before. He was the one who knew how to register an LLC, how to structure a quitclaim, how to move a transaction fast enough that no one looks too closely. He supplied the method. But my sister opened the door. What I keep coming back to is the intelligence question. Not IQ. I mean something more practical than that. The kind of intelligence that asks, what am I not seeing? The kind that pauses before a decision and runs it forward in time, honestly, without flinching at the answer. My sister is not a stupid person, neither is her boyfriend, but neither of them asked that question. They saw a short-term solution and they took it, and they did not think carefully about what comes after. What comes after, in this case, was me. I spent 6 years building toward that house. 6 years of choices that were not dramatic or exciting. They were just consistent. I paid attention to what I spent. I learned my field well enough to be trusted with complex work. I read documents. I asked questions. None of that felt like preparation for anything specific. It just felt like being a careful person. As it turned out, being a careful person was exactly the preparation I needed. There is something worth saying about what happens when you decide not to look away from a hard thing. My mother wanted me to look away. She framed it as compassion, as understanding, as family, as being bigger than the situation. And I understand the impulse. Looking away is easier in the short term. It keeps the peace. It lets everyone pretend. But pretending has a cost that doesn't show up right away. It shows up later, compounded. The person who does the harm learns that harm is acceptable. The person who absorbs it learns that their own pain doesn't matter. And the truth, the actual, documentable truth, gets buried under a version of events that serves whoever had the most to gain from the burial. I didn't let that happen. Not because I'm braver than anyone else, Because I knew how to find the truth, and I believed it was worth finding. My house has new owners now, ones I chose. The oak tree is still there as far as I know. I hope whoever lives there looks at it sometimes. I think about what I want the rest of my life to look like, and what I keep coming back to is this. I want to be someone who does the hard thing when it is the right thing, who doesn't mistake silence for kindness, who understands that real accountability, for yourself, for the people around you, is not cruelty. It is the only honest way to move through the world. My sister is rebuilding. I don't know what she has learned. That part is not mine to control. What I control is what I do next, and I intend to do it with my name on every document in my own hand exactly where it belongs.